Okay, we're rolling.
All right. Well, number one, thank you so much to everybody for joining us here today. My name is Danielle Conrad. I'm the Executive Director of the ACLU of Nebraska, and I'm absolutely delighted to welcome one of our elected officials, a strong progressive leader when it comes to the civil rights and civil liberties of all Nebraskans, and a good friend of our office. We're joined today by Lancaster County Public Defender Joe Nigro. Joe, say hi and tell us a little bit about yourself. Tell us about you, your family, your career, kind of what brought you to this position and to your work today.
Thank you for having me. I grew up in Omaha, came down to school at the university for both undergraduate and law school, and about 2 months after I got sworn in as an attorney, I started work at the Public Defender's Office, and that was almost 35 years ago. I've been the elected public defender since 2014, and Sherry and I raised 3 kids here in Lincoln who attended Lincoln Public Schools, and love Lincoln as a community. I've dedicated my professional career to the Public Defender's Office, and we represent people who cannot afford an attorney who are charged with crimes. The first time somebody goes to court, if the judge thinks jail's a possibility, they're going to ask if the person can afford an attorney, and the judge makes the determination on who we represent. We represent people on felonies which carry more than a year in jail, misdemeanors that carry up to a year in jail, juvenile court. We don't represent the parents, we represent the juveniles, both on law violations and status offenses such as truancy. And we also represent people before the mental health board facing mental health commitment.
Right.
And through my career, I've done all of those things. And so that's a little background on me and our office.
Yeah, that's a good overview. Tell me, just to follow up there, kind of about the nuts and bolts with the Lancaster County Public Defender's Office. How many attorneys do you have on your team? Do you have other partners or professionals that assist in the work to investigate cases or provide social services support? Tell us just a little bit more, pull back the curtain, let us know kind of how things work in your shop.
Yes, we have 23 attorneys and I believe 42 total employees. Those attorneys, some are on the felony docket, some do misdemeanors, some do juvenile court, and we take cases and then assign them as they come in and try to keep workloads balanced. We were actually one of the first offices in the country that had a workload study, and so we decline appointments when we reach certain numbers depending on the docket, and that's helped keep our workload more manageable. In addition to the attorneys, obviously there are secretarial staff, support staff, but we have 2 investigators. We have a social worker. That person was added since I've been in office. I'm very proud of that because it's made our representation more complete. So many of the people we represent have mental health and substance abuse issues, and by having a social worker in-house, we can try to get people assessed more quickly and connected to services, because for many of these people, if they can get medication for mental health issues, housing, treatment for substance abuse, they're not likely to come back into the system. And incarcerating people does nothing to deal with those underlying problems. And so I think it's made our representation more complete. I think there are already instances where judges have altered the sentence they were going to impose because we had a sentencing plan prepared by our social worker, and they could feel that this was going to be less of a risk to the community. So I'm pretty excited about that. And then we have law clerks who are law students doing research, and so I am very proud of the comprehensive nature of what we do in terms of providing legal representation. And we have a lot of people in our office who have been there a long time, and I think that that's an indication of the good work environment and the high quality and the collegiality, because you hear horror stories of public defenders' offices who are overwhelmed and people get burned out, and we do a lot of things to try and prevent that. And I think it's helped us to keep a lot of people stay on our staff, and when we interview people for new positions, the quality of the applicants is really high. You're not going to get rich working as a public defender, but we take care of people, and people know. I mean, I know for me, all these years, I liked having a job that made a difference.
Yeah,
I think all of us have a responsibility to make the world around us a better place, and it's really satisfying when you know that you're doing something that's helping people, especially helping the most vulnerable members of our community.
That's right. And we see a lot of that dedication and passion when we have an opportunity to interact with your team and see their good works, not only in the courtroom but out in the community, and that I think is definitely a feather in the cap to your leadership and some of the structural supports that you've built in to really sustain and retain and recruit top quality lawyers who really want to make a difference. So that's absolutely evident. Joe, you mentioned it just a little bit, but since you've spent, the really a significant amount of your time, most of your professional career in the public defender's office, on the front lines and now in a leadership level, how does that front lines experience kind of inform your leadership today? Now when it's your name on the ballot and you're out there in the public eye, I mean, I think it would just probably be invaluable to understanding some of the challenges your team faces and have a better understanding of the kind of resources they need to do their jobs. I mean, talk a little bit about that transition or experience, if you might, if you have a second.
Well, I think the experience has been invaluable in understanding the demands placed on the people in our office, and trying to make sure that we get adequate resources, trying to make sure that those people are cared for internally, but also getting adequate support from the county board, making sure that that we keep up in terms of support for what we're trying to accomplish, and the years of experience I have, and now the position I'm in as the elected official, have given me a platform to speak out on criminal justice reform issues. And for most of the time that I have worked in the office, I mean, really even predating me, politicians knew that the easiest thing to do on criminal justice was to just be tough on crime. That was the safest way to get reelected. And what's been exciting for me is that about the same time that I got elected, there's really been a sea change where now you have, and it's not just liberals, there are conservatives who are looking at the system and realizing we're spending an enormous amount of money to do something that doesn't work. In fact, it frequently makes things worse. And so people have been open to reform ideas, and I know I have credibility because I've worked in the system for so long to talk about the things that I think would be more effective. I mean, we can all agree that there are dangerous people who, when they're found guilty, I mean, society needs to be kept safe from them, but so many of the people who wind up caught up in the system are there because of those mental health and substance abuse issues. And then there are so many aspects of the system that treat people worse because they're poor. And then, you cannot incarcerate people into compliance. It doesn't work. And so we have all these people locked up who don't need to be there, and what we're doing is making them worse. And so it's been interesting to talk with all kinds of politicians from different political perspectives about how can we make the system work better, and certainly how can we spend less money. And we really have a crisis at the state level with our prison overcrowding, and we're filling up our county jail. So it's really on all levels that we need to look at a lot of things. And the legislature passed significant reform 3 years ago, and that was really exciting, and I was very involved in that effort. And it's helped, but it's not having the impact they thought it would, because there are people who are still reluctant to change their ways and accept the research and the evidence that's out there about we just shouldn't be locking people up, because that's what we've always done.
Yeah, it's difficult to change the status quo, and it takes a while for the policy to be implemented on the front lines, and to try a new way. But I think you're exactly right. I see a lot of hope actually when it comes to the issues and areas of criminal justice reform, because there is bipartisan support. There is support across the political spectrum, and we come to it for different reasons perhaps, but the outcome is the same, and you're seeing that on the national level and play out here on the state level, and maybe start to even build on some of that at the local level here too, which is really exciting. But you know, one of the pieces that you mentioned, I think, is a perfect segue to the next really topic that I wanted to make sure to cover today. And we wanted to make sure to give people a general overview about what is a debtor's prison? What are modern day debtor's prisons? You hear this term used a lot. We talk about it in our work. You might see it in some of the reports that we've published, like the Unequal Justice Report that we put out in 2016. We've talked about it in terms of legislative reform, and it's gotten a lot of play as well, and as we rolled out our new bail project and some other innovations. So, Joe, from that frontline perspective, from that policy perspective, kind of just help break it down maybe for a general audience when we talk about debtor's prisons or modern day debtor's prisons. What the heck does that mean? What is that? What is that? How does that impact people's lives?
Well, you know, it's interesting because when you use the term debtor's prison, I mean, it really does take you back to the era of Charles Dickens.
Right, yeah.
You know,
right.
where people are in the workhouse.
Right.
And, you know, long ago, courts in this country said, we're not going to lock people up because they have debts.
Right.
But our system of bond at the front end and fines and fees at the back end have, in effect, created modern day debtors' prisons. And as I have, the more I have thought about this and worked on it, I was involved in the passage of LB 259
yes.
last year that tried to deal with both ends of this problem here in
yes.
Nebraska. But I think, at least on the bond end, it didn't go far enough. Now there's a lot. This is not an issue unique to Nebraska.
That's right.
This is going on all over the country. And I know that the Justice Department, when Eric Holder was the Attorney General, basically took the position that money bond needed to end, because what it does is it punishes poor people. And there's been litigation recently in New Orleans.
Yes, that's right.
On both bond and fines. A year ago there was litigation that was successful in Houston.
That's right. That's right. Harris
You know,
County. Yeah.
There was a decision this summer in Tennessee where a judge found it was wrong to revoke driver's licenses because somebody couldn't pay a traffic fine, and that. Because what happens is then people wind up driving because they have to drive, and they get and it just escalates and gets worse. I know there's been reforms in Alaska. There were some things that went on in Maryland, although there was a study in Prince George County that was concerning because now the judges seem to be holding people with no bond at increasing rates and disproportionately maybe holding people of color, and so those things are happening under money bond, and you know, any reforms we undertake, we need to make sure that we don't just find a new way that poor people and people of color get punished. And I know there's legislation pending in California, so this is going on all over the country. And I was very excited when LB 259 passed.
Right, absolutely.
You know, one of the things it did was it said that judges have to take into consideration a defendant's financial ability to pay.
Right.
And so they shouldn't just have the same bond for, you know,
Right.
I set a $5,000 percentage bond for this type of offense, no matter who you are.
Yeah, that reflexive kind of practice that's not tailored to the individual ability to pay or financial circumstances ends up with some really significant disparities and impacts.
Well, you know, the problem with a system like that is, I mean, the research is really clear that how much money you post bears no relationship to whether or not you're likely to come back to court, which has always been the major purpose of bond, or safety in the community. That safety component was, prosecutors were able to get that added to the law, and they frequently will hang their hat on that at the initial court appearance and arguing to the court that this person is dangerous. But again, the fact that I have $500 and you don't,
Right.
doesn't bury, there's no connection between that and safety or likelihood to return to court. And so the judges should be tailoring bonds to individuals if we're going to have a money bond system. What we're seeing, unfortunately, since that law passed, is the judges are noting that they're taking that into consideration, and then they're still setting bonds that prosecutors request, or sometimes they may show that they're meeting halfway. But the problem is, if you can only come up with $500 and you need $1,000, and the judge says, well, I'm going to cut it to $750, it's this fallacious assumption that a lot of judges have that, oh, you just haven't tried hard enough to like talk to all your family members. The problem with the money bond system at the front end is the people who wind up staying in jail are people who don't have money.
That's right.
And if I don't make it to work tomorrow, I'm not going to lose my job. But some of the people we represent, you might miss one shift, you're going to lose your job. Then you're going to lose your apartment.
That's right.
Then your children go into foster care.
Right.
Your whole life is turned upside down. And these are people who are presumed innocent.
Right.
Over 60% of the people in our county jail are pretrial detainees.
Right.
These people are presumed innocent. And so what happens on minor charges, a lot of those people just plead guilty to get the case over with so they can get out.
Right. Right.
You know, maybe they would have had a good defense.
Right.
Maybe they would have been able to get a charge dismissed, but we'll never know because they had to plead.
Right.
And so
it's such a vicious cycle.
that's what's happening on the front end. Now prosecutors and judges may say, well, a lot of these people, you know, they failed to appear. So they didn't have a bond, or they had a lower bond, and then they get picked up. And they come back in, but there's all kinds of reasons why people miss court. Not everybody, very few people are actually fleeing.
Right.
Most of the people are still in the community.
Right.
It's hard to convey to a lot of people how difficult the lives of my clients are. People who every day may wonder where they're going to sleep that night.
Right.
Where am I going to get my next meal? Right. So they had this ticket, and then they forgot to come back to court. They're not fleeing, they're here.
Right.
Well, now this bond gets slapped on them, and now they're stuck in jail, and all those consequences I described wind up impacting them. And so on that part of 259, I think that change was an important change, but it wasn't enough. And what I believe now is that regarding bond, we need to end money bond completely. And there is some discussion on people on my side of the issue about, you know, do we just reform it? But we already have language that says you should be looking at other alternatives, and you should be considering financial ability to pay, and these people are still there.
Yeah.
I think we're going to have to, you know, and so I hope we can get a senator to introduce legislation that would just flat out end money bond. Because to me, the correct way to deal with this issue is to have evidence-based risk assessments done about who needs to remain in custody, and if people are going to be released, what level of supervision do they need? Most of the people don't need any at all. Our community corrections program does an excellent job with their pretrial release program, where they do evaluate people. And they won't hesitate to say, we can't recommend this person for release if they don't think the person's safe to be in the community, or if they don't have an adequate place to live. But they have different levels of monitoring, and you know, at the highest level they can have people on electronic monitoring where they're wearing a bracelet, so they're going to know if that person tries to take off or do something. The frequency with which people are being checked on, or they have to check in, varies. And so you can account for community safety, and also they're really effective at getting people coming back to court. And while people are out on those kinds of programs, they can start to plug them into mental health services, substance abuse treatment. So you're dealing with the risk factors that cause this person to perhaps commit this offense, if they did commit it in the first place. And so, unfortunately, I mean, that program doesn't get, I think it's underutilized. Prosecutors sometimes object. Judges are willing to go, they generally are going to go with the prosecutors on these sorts of things. And there are limited offenses for which they can be considered. The judges have the discretion to order on any offense. I had somebody on a Class 1B felony carrying 20 to life who got out because the judge ordered it on pretrial release. he made all of his appointments. He ultimately was convicted and he went to prison, but he was not a risk in the community. Well, now we have some judges saying they're not even going to screen people if they're not for eligible offenses. Well, the judges have the discretion, and so we're going to need to move to a system like that. Now, when we do that, we're going to have to make sure that the new system doesn't wind up discriminating against people because of race or poverty, because if they're looking at factors like criminal history or prior failures to appear, I mean, all these problems that have occurred over decades.
Kind of replicate that.
And so we have to make sure that it doesn't hurt those people. But we know the current system does.
Yeah, that's right.
So we just need to get rid of it.
I think
because people don't seem to be adapting their practices to make sure that the current system doesn't punish poor people who are still presumed innocent.
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. And, you know, we worked collaboratively with you and your office and the Nebraska Criminal Defense Attorneys Association and a lot of other key stakeholders down at the legislature on passing and advocating for LB 259, that comprehensive reform. And we were grateful that it enjoyed such broad, strong support across the political spectrum. But what our law clerks and attorneys have been finding since the passage of that law is that practices, as you know, haven't really changed that much on the front lines as we're out doing the court watching and kind of looking to see how that law is being implemented, and certain parts are implemented, certain parts to come, but it isn't having quite the impact that we would have hoped. And I think, you know, it goes without saying that there's good people working hard in all of the different offices that are out there, the judges, the prosecutors, the private bar, the public defender's office, and a lot of times they're under-resourced. But whether it's a collaboration on additional, you know, judicial education or CLEs or getting the word out to the community so that people can know and understand and invoke their rights more robustly, you know, we've passed the laws, we've written the reports, we've garnered the headlines, and we're still not seeing that change really trickle down. And you know, and that impacts us all. It impacts the individual civil rights and civil liberties of those individuals trapped in the system. And then as taxpayers, you know, we have a fairly new county jail right here in Lancaster that was supposed to meet our community's needs for years and years to come, and it's already at capacity and is an incredibly expensive proposition with you know, real limits to the remedy that it can provide to the community in meeting our shared public safety goals. So you know, and when you're talking about a county jail, of course, those folks are coming home, right? All of them are coming home. When we think about the state prison system, which is, you know, equally overcrowded and under-resourced, something like well over 90% of those folks will be returning to our communities at some point in time. So the more that we can do at every point in the system to, you know, stop over policing communities that are overrepresented in these systems, low-income Nebraskans, people of color, people with disabilities, people with behavioral health issues, to try and address those disparities and that we see play out, whether it's the amount of bail that's set, whether it's the severity of the charge and the sentence, all of those different factors that go into it. And I think you're right. I think that what we're seeing in other jurisdictions is that there are models for reform and success. But there, as you know, there's no easy answers either, and you have to have the appropriate safeguards in place to make sure that those new tools don't become kind of a replication of some of the existing problems in the present system. So I've been reading some of the same research about, you know, risk assessments and making sure they're non-biased and effective. But we're hopeful that, you know, by starting these tough conversations, we're going to continue to make a difference out there. And you know, one thing that we wanted to talk about was after that kind of experience with various reform efforts, we had a donor come to us and said, you know, we're seeing these bail funds play out in other communities, and this seems like a really innovative grassroots idea that we'd like to work with you on to shake up the system a little bit and to equal the playing field a little bit when it comes to the scales of justice so that people are treated fairly in terms of their ability to pay. And so it's been really a great learning opportunity for the ACLU of Nebraska, and working with partners like you and your office, the private defenders, academics looking at this, the reentry community, and the response thus far to this new project, and it's really new, it's really in its infancy, just a couple weeks old, has been really phenomenal, and we've been really heartened by that. But talk just a little bit about kind of what your perspective is on seeing some of these community initiated kind of grassroots strategies come forward to address some of the problems with money bail.
Well, I was very excited when I learned that the ACLU was going to start this bond fund and help people who don't have anyone else to help them post bond to get out of jail. Because again, on many of these offenses, people are stuck in jail. They're frequently just going to plead to get the case over with, and maybe you get a different outcome. So this was a concept that started with the Brooklyn defenders, and that's grown there in New York, and I believe their compliance rate is 95%.
Right, yeah.
People are coming back to court, and again, it does shine a light on the flaw of the money bond system, because those were all people who would have had to stay in jail.
Right.
And it costs $100 a day for people to be in our county jail, and so, yeah, it's saving the taxpayers money. These people obviously don't need to be there. They're coming back to court. Mm-hmm. They're not getting arrested on new charges. Overwhelmingly, I mean, at least in New York, it's been successful, and I think when it's been tried other places. So I think it has great potential here, and until we can get rid of money bond, it's sure nice that there's another resource for people to be able to try and post bond and get out of jail. I do want to compliment Pat Conrad and the county attorney Jeff Kirkpatrick, the city attorney, and our county court judges. Last week,
yes, let's
there
talk
was
about
a warrant
week.
and that was a
Right,
project
yes.
that the prosecutors thought of, and then got the county judges to agree. And so for a week on misdemeanors, people could come in and take care of warrants. And I don't know what the totals are, but I know I went and watched one day, and that day there weren't a lot of people, but it was probably 8 or so. But the day before they'd had 35 in that courtroom, and that was just some city charges, and those were just 2 days. And there were people taking care of county attorney filed warrants also. So and that had come up on kind of short notice. So
Yes,
I'm
that's
hopeful that they will be willing to do this again, and maybe do it on a fairly frequent basis, and with lots of promotion in advance. I think we could clear up a lot of warrants for people who really don't need to be in jail.
I think that's right. We were equally surprised at the announcement, and pleasantly surprised to see that the city prosecutors and the county prosecutors and judges had come together to recognize that there is a problem in our system, and that we can do a lot better from a judicial efficiency perspective, from a public safety perspective. And I think what's so striking about their development and announcement and then implementation of Warrant Week is it's such a clear example of the incredible discretion that prosecutors have as stakeholders in the criminal justice system to, literally with a wave of a wand there last week, they said anybody who's got an outstanding misdemeanor warrant, come on back in. We're going to clear the decks. We're going to give you a fresh start. We're going to return your bond or bail in some instances. And it was a really bold and very broad program that really could provide a lot of benefits to folks to kind of stop that vicious cycle, kind of get a fresh start and come back to it. And so we were carefully watching as well, and we'll be interested to know what the final statistics look like there. But we're hopeful that with more community outreach, building some community trust, expanding the program perhaps, that might be a really powerful strategy that we could work together on to help a lot of people out. So
well, it's interesting when you hear people from Brooklyn, and I mean they've expanded it way beyond bond. They have social workers connecting people to services.
Yes.
They're doing all kinds of things And ultimately, I mean, we all want to live in a safe community.
Everyone.
And so if we can help these people deal with their underlying problems, it's helping not only them, but it's going to help all of us. And so, yeah, I'm really excited about the potential for this, and it's just great. And
Joe, talk about a little bit about that prosecutorial discretion piece, though, because I know that's a big part of how your office has to work within the dynamics of the criminal justice system, and that's an area that ACLU has really started to increase the amount of public education about these different stakeholders and their role. You know, the judges have a role, the prosecutors have a role, your office has a role. You know, we've talked about policy, how that's set at the state level usually on these matters. But when it comes to implementing that and making those decisions, whether you're city attorney or county attorney, they really have a significantly broad grant of discretion to decide who is charged, what is charged, how to pursue the case. And then, of course, your team is out there doing as much as they can proactively, but then in many ways has to be kind of responsive to those actions and decisions on the prosecutor's side. So, you know, again, it's such a clear example of how much discretion folks have in those offices that we saw in Warrant Week, and kind of just what's your take on that? I mean, how does that kind of work in the modern era in this community when you kind of think about the power of prosecutorial discretion?
Well, prosecutors have enormous power, and the way the system works is, you know, when somebody gets arrested or cited, the officer is going to submit police reports to the prosecutors. They're going to read those and make a charging decision, and that first time you go to court, a person accused of a crime is going to be told what they're charged with, what the penalties are. Again, if jails or if incarceration is a possibility in the judge's mind, they're going to ask if they qualify for an attorney. They're obviously going to, on misdemeanors, that initial appearance is going to be asked how they plead. And then bond's going to be set. And prosecutors' recommendations carry a lot of weight with judges in setting, in setting the bond. And so prosecutors have a lot of power then in not only deciding what the person is charged with, but they're going to have a lot of say in whether that person remains in custody while the case is pending. And so you hope that they'll weigh all these factors. But again, I just think that for many, many years, there's been a lot of inertia in the system. And it's like, well, we've always done it this way. So we're going to ask for these bonds. Judges are going to set these bonds. And really just trying to get people to think outside the box based on more recent research about more effective ways to get people back to court, to keep the community safe, and to not discriminate against people who are poor or people of color. So I think that we just need to get rid of money bond because it doesn't work. And I'm hopeful that we're going to get there eventually. You know, the feds hardly use money bond at all, and you know, like the District of Columbia, they're charging all kinds of offenses. And I think that their system works better. So that's something we probably ought to look at. And again, there've been reform efforts. I know New Jersey. That's right. Some statutes have been praised as far as their bond reform. So I think, you know, we ought to look at some of those places that have really moved forward and think about different ways to handle that.
Joe, I love that. Not only are you working on the front lines, not only are you doing the hard work in the policy arena, but you keep your foot on the gas pedal for additional reforms and really doing a thorough examination of what's working in other communities. So it's always so fun to work with you on those things. And one thing that I wanted to make sure to cover, because this is definitely kind of like it could be a little academic or a little focused on perhaps a legal audience and other critical stakeholders, but we have a lot of supporters who aren't lawyers, who don't have that kind of training and background, but who really care and who really want to help address some of these issues that they're seeing in the community. So, you know, what would really be your ideas or message to kind of some of our neighbors in the community, other community members who want to speak out and help join your efforts and our efforts to really push for reforms or shine some light on how these broken systems, really impact people's lives and their families. Do you have any kind of general ideas about how other folks can get involved or make a positive difference?
Well, vote for people who want to reform the system.
Absolutely.
That's the first thing.
Absolutely.
Who don't just say, let's be tough on crime and try to scare
That's
people. But work in campaigns for those sorts of candidates who are going to reform the system. That's the first thing. But I think, go talk to elected officials, from the county attorney to the mayor, to the county board, city council, especially the state legislature. Let those people know that there are people out there who want things done in a different way. Because I think that ultimately elected officials do respond to what they sense the public wants. I mean, you hope that politicians will do what they think is right no matter what, but they're gonna always give a lot of weight to where they think public sentiment is, and and for so long, the only people that ever spoke out were the people who, we gotta be tough.
Right.
And, and what I like to say is, we had years of being tough on crime, we need to be smart on crime.
That's right.
And, the part we haven't really talked about, the other piece of 259 that I was so excited about was the fine reform, because at the back end, where people get caught up in the system, is you can't jail somebody because they can't afford to pay a fine. But what happens is everybody gets time to pay. If they don't pay by that due date, and they don't come in and ask for more time, a warrant gets issued. And when they get arrested, those people just get taken to jail. They sit out fines.
Don't pass go, you go right.
And you never see a judge.
Right.
And that part was really disturbing to me. People used to sit out at the rate of $90 a day. 259 increased that to $150 a day. So it shortened how long people had to sit out fines. But the biggest reform on that is going to take effect on July 1st of next year. And that is going to require judges to make a determination on what people can afford to pay at the time of sentencing, which is an important reform. And one of the things we need to guard against is that it doesn't turn out that judges just give people jail then, because that's an easy way out, because that's going to defeat the purpose. What's happened though is these people get picked up on these failure to pay warrants, and now it's essentially like a contempt of court because they didn't come to court. That's how they get around the debtor's prison piece of it. But when 259, the last part of it, kicks in a year, the people who get arrested on failure to pay warrants have to go in front of the judge, I think, the next day. And if the judge can extend the due date and let them out to do community service, I'm all for having more people do community service. I think people learn from that, and it provides value to the community. Or they have to discharge it if the person can't afford to pay. But in 1 year, Lancaster County spent $5.5 million on people sitting out fines. Those are not people who are dangerous to the community, they were fined. That's an incredible expenditure to warehouse people. And I know some people say, well, they've got to be held responsible. Well, let's try to move to a system. I mean, maybe we ought to move to a system someday where we don't even fine people. Maybe they ought to all be doing community service if they're able. We certainly should have more people doing community service than being locked up.
Bring in some other restorative justice principles to really make a positive difference there, instead of just kind of warehousing people with a big price tag and limited results. So I think that you're exactly right. There's a lot of other positive and clear solutions out there, whether it's payment plans, whether it's a reduction, whether it's the community service, or whether it's a discharge or something even more innovative or creative, to help break those cycles and ensure some fairness.
The other thing that 259 will do is that for people who get traffic tickets, those people, if they don't pay their fine, they're not going to be jailed to sit it out. Notice will be sent to the Department of Motor Vehicles, and their license will be revoked. Well, then you get into that problem we discussed earlier, where now people have a revoked license or suspended license, they get a ticket for that. Because the reality here in most parts of Nebraska is there isn't adequate mass transit, if there's any. And people have to get to work, they have to take their kids to school, so they drive anyway. Well, now, under this change, before notice gets sent to DMV, if you come in and ask for a hearing, the judge again can extend it and have you do community service, or they have to discharge you if you can't afford to pay. Hopefully we'll reduce the number of revoked licenses. I mean, that's something we really have to look at. You know, for a long time that became, oh, we're gonna get people to do these things by revoking their license. One of the things is people get their license revoked for failure to pay child support. Well, now you can't drive to your job. So is that gonna help child support get paid? We all want child support to be paid. And the same things happen, you know, we want people to be able to have a job to pay these fines. Well, if they lose their license, they can't get to work, it's kind of hard to pay the fines.
It frustrates all our goals.
So I'll be excited to see how it works when it kicks in next year. And but that change, you know, has the potential to be more significant than what the bond reform piece of 259 had so far. So I just, you know, as I've heard and stories about what's going on around the country, I mean, this reform is one of my priority issues. You know, it's only one because there's so many. You know, we haven't really talked very much about all the people with mental health issues in the system, but I'm actually chairing the statewide Supreme Court committee to establish mental health courts that would work similarly to drug courts to try and divert some of the many people with mental health issues out of the system. They've worked in other places, and we're going to get them here. It's just, you know, it's the time. Yeah, we're working on setting up the standards, and then we're going to have to access funding. But the difference between somebody going to a problem-solving court is it might cost us $5,000 to $7,000 a year. Prison costs more like $35,000 a year, and gets worse results. So you know,
and those dollar amounts really tick up exponentially for people with special needs or behavioral health needs or mental illness. I mean, I've seen statistics from our local jail administrator that it's, you know, about $100 a day to house somebody, but it could be as high as $200 or $300 a day for the county taxpayers if they have those special needs to attend to. And so
Lincoln's police chief will tell people that, and does tell people that mental health calls are second only to traffic calls for the police department. It's way more than criminal investigations. 60 years ago, we used to warehouse people in mental hospitals. We deinstitutionalized, but we never provided adequate community services. And in the meantime, we've reduced our inpatient beds. Now we don't have enough inpatient beds. We don't have enough outpatient services. Mental health courts will only deal with a small piece of this. Ultimately, as a society, we need to spend more money on mental health. If we do, we will spend less money on prisons and jails, and we'll certainly treat people with mental health issues in a more humane and effective way. And so that's another issue I'm really devoted to.
We'll have to set another time to talk all about those, because I think that is an important and a big topic. And you know, there's a lot of energy around problem-solving courts in Nebraska, whether it's youth courts or veterans courts or mental illness or drug courts. And you know, we think that there's a lot of common ground there, but you're right, you have to have the appropriate procedural safeguards to make sure it doesn't replicate some of the problems in the existing system. But if done appropriately and resourced appropriately, I think it can really, really make a positive difference in kind of pulling people out of a traditional criminal justice response approach to some of these issues, and provide really more of a public health type of response to a lot of these issues, which is driving really the system of mass incarceration at the local or the state or even the federal level. So let's have that conversation. And
well, the other conversation I'd like to have, my other priority is I think we have to end the failed war on drugs. It hasn't been any more effective than prohibition, and we need to start by legalizing marijuana, because we're spending so many resources and ruining people's lives by locking them up, and they acquire criminal histories that impact them in other ways, and we need to treat drug abuse as a health problem and not a criminal justice issue. And
It drives a lot of the racial disparities in the
Yes.
system, a lot of the socioeconomic. It really becomes a feeder system for a lot of the mass incarceration problems. And we're seeing more and more states, get more sensible about their drug policy and more models out there. So you've actually been one of the few and refreshing and boldest voices in the scene in Nebraska, really leading the charge for that sensible drug policy. So we thank you for that, and we definitely need to set another
Well, and that's an
conversation
issue where
to
the
talk
people
about
are in
that.
front of
Way
most of our
out in
political
front.
leaders,
Yeah,
and,
way out
and
in
it's
front.
time for the
Yeah.
political leaders to catch up to the people and do the right thing.
I think that's right. Thank
It's
you.
been a pleasure.
Thank you so much. So tune in, check out the ACLU of Nebraska's social media channels, our website. There's amazing resources there for attorneys, for community members to learn more about debtors' prisons, money bail, some of the topics that we've talked about today. If you want to get involved, you can help us with court watching. If you want to devote your volunteer services as an attorney, you can reach out and we can help to connect you into that system. We want people to share their stories about how money bail is really impacting their lives and their families and their jobs. And we definitely want people to know that there's pro se forms available, self-help forms available on our website, at the Supreme Court's website, so that people can have some tools and resources to really self-advocate, to be empowered, to present these key facts to judges and prosecutors at these different stages along the way. So 3 cheers for Joe Nigro, his incredible good work, and we really look forward to continuing this conversation with the community and pushing forward with thoughtful, appropriate reforms to improve our criminal justice system, save taxpayers some money, and protect the civil rights and civil liberties of our neighbors.
And vote for progressive candidates who will change the system.
Perfect.
Thank you.
We covered a lot of stuff there. I'm so glad you said vote. That's so important.